Good morning. I am Calum MacDhaibhidh. This class is to acid etch on steel. You are all the first time I have taught on Zoom, so thank you for all being guinea pigs with me. I would ask that you have yourselves on mute to keep any background noise out, but if you find you have a question, please unmute yourself, jump in and ask. Before I start, I want to very clearly say, do try this at home. It is fun, at least if you're a science geek like me. That said, be careful, protect yourself. We are dealing with substances that eat steel. You do not want this in your lungs. You do not want this in your eyes. Wear masks, wear gloves, wear face protection, protect yourself. Also, check your local laws. In my city, I can show up on a Sunday and drop off my used chemicals as municipal waste. I'm sorry, municipal toxic waste, and the city will take care of it for me appropriately. You do not just dump this in the garbage and forget about it. You don't need this stuff in the local landfill or leaching into the local water supply. Protect yourself, protect everyone else. Okay, so this started off with me looking at armors. Armor is my main focus, but it works just as well for any other metal thing. And I was trying to figure out, how did they do what they did using only the things they had available to them? There are a whole bunch of 21st century technologies that we can use to make really beautiful patterns eaten into steel. But how did they do it? They did not have the chemical understanding that we do. They certainly did not have the tools that we had. So my whole question was, how? That's one of the ones that Serena was talking about in her keynote speech. People have been decorating metal for many centuries. You can hammer it into shapes. You can use a sharp thing to carve into it. But starting right about the year 1500, they learned how to make a chemical eat away a large swath of steel. If you are using an engraving tool, you can do very fine lines. And if you do enough fine lines close enough together, you can cover a broad area. But that is very slow and very labor intensive. By using an acid to eat a comparatively broad swath, you can do things much quicker and get a very nice effect. You can do this on any iron or steel object. Again, my interest was in armor. There are firearms that have this applied to them for decoration. There are pole arms. There are arrowheads. There's teeny little things that someone who has way better eyesight than I did can turn into very decorated objects. If you are able to get to the Wallace collection, the Wallace Museum in London, they have a wonderful set of about 11-inch long fabric shears that are acid etched to be just beautiful. I wish I had a picture of them to show you, but sadly I do not. What I was interested in is, how did they do it with what they had? If you are interested in having the thing and the process does not appeal to you, use the modern cheats. A modern saltwater acid etching is much quicker, much easier to do as long as you don't breathe the fumes. And the results are absolutely the same. You can't tell one from the other just by looking at the finished product. If the product is what you're interested in rather than the process, use the cheat, use the modern techniques. It'll go faster and easier for you. I got interested and started looking at how did they do it. There was a small little pamphlet, Von Steel und Essen, on steel and iron, written in German in 1532 in Nuremberg. My German is weak. My medieval German is non-existent, so I had to rely on a translation that was published by Mr. Smith, Cyril Smith, in 1968. Amazon, $25. It's worth it. The thing that got me was I had this image in my head of the giant vat of acid, and they dip the armor piece in it, and then the guy falls in, and when he comes out, he's the Joker, and Batman has to save the city. And that's just not how it is at all. They did not use giant vats of acid. In order to be controllable on a piece of armor, it turns out that what they're actually doing is making an acidic paste. It comes out about like a creamy peanut butter or a toothpaste consistency. You can smear this on the armor, which is generally curved in at least 2 dimensions and usually 3, and it stays where you put it. If you get something that's more like a modern liquid acid, you put it on a curved shape and it just runs off. It doesn't stick around long enough to do the job. There are some recipes in the book that are described as waters, and they are for flat pieces, not really curved ones. I'm sorry, looking at my notes. When you are putting the acid on, any exposed part of the steel will be eaten by the acid. So you need to cover that with something that will protect the steel, a resist. The book universally asks for red lead as the resist. I think everybody here has heard about the dangers of lead paint. They're saying red lead with a little linseed oil mixed together, smeared on it, on the steel as your resist. That's fine for the medieval period. We know things about how dangerous that can be. So my very first reaction on reading this was, oh, heck no. And I started looking for what can I use as a substitute? They're using the red lead as a paint, so I started looking at modern paints. There are modern artists that still have access to lead paints because the lead just does things so well. So I looked for what are modern paints that are designed specifically as a replacement for the lead paints. And what I was able to find is a modern white lead, flake white, that has a modern safe replacement of either a zinc-based paint or a titanium-based paint. So I tried both of them. Neither of those worked. As soon as, once the acid sits on the modern paint, it lifts the paint off of the steel and then corrodes, and it did not resist the acid at all. I tried this with the titanium, it failed. I tried it with the zinc, it failed. I could have just gone with any random paint and seen, but again, I was trying to stay as close as possible to how they did it rather than how we could do it. Getting a little frustrated, I decided I would give the lead-based paints a try. What I could find first was the flake white, the white lead paint. Is that different than the red lead that they were asking for in the period source? I don't know. Let's experiment and find out. The white lead paint works wonderfully, except now you've got a whole bunch of white lead paint that you have to deal with. Once you put it on, you want the white lead to dry a little bit so that the acid doesn't smear it right off. But if it hasn't completely dried, by the time you put the acid on it, the moisture in the acid will keep the paint wet. And so at the end, when your piece is done, you can take a paper towel and wipe the paint nicely off of the piece. You now have a paper towel filled with lead paint. And in my municipality, I can take this to City Hall on the weekend and say, rag filled with lead paint, get rid of it for me. And they will do that in the appropriate way. You don't just throw this in your trash can and forget about it. If you have let it sit too long, now you've got a hardened lead paint that you have to try and scrape off of your piece. And now you're starting to deal with lead dust in the air. And how do you clean what is essentially going to be a contaminated workshop of lead dust? That's bad. Don't do that. Let it sit for a little bit, a couple of days to dry, but not dry completely, so you can smoothly wipe it off. I found that the white lead worked wonderfully, but it came out of the tube very, very thick. It was easy to cover an area, but it was not easy to turn that into any sort of fine detail. I had to thin the paint out a little bit. It's lead plus linseed oil, so you can get linseed oil at the hardware store to thin it out. You have a choice between linseed oil and boiled linseed oil. Historically, boiled linseed oil is boiled to drive off some of the water to help it dry faster. Linseed oil is notorious for drying slowly. Modernly, they do not boil the boiled oil. They add chemicals to it that artificially speed the drying. Does that make a difference? In a practical sense, not really. For making a small piece, you're going to put your resist on, let it dry a little bit, a couple of days. You put your acid on, a few repeats of this as needed to get the depth you want, and then clean it off. The chemical boiled and the straight linseed oil give you the same results on that time scale. If you are doing a complete armor and you have to get all of the patterns matched, so you want to do all of them all at once, and there's going to be several weeks between when your paintbrush first hits the piece to when you are finished scraping it off, that's long enough that the difference between the boiled and the unboiled is going to show up, and the boiled is going to be much, much harder to get off of the piece. If you're going to do a big project where your time frame is comparatively large, use the unboiled oil. On all of these, the magic is not necessarily the resist, it's what recipe you've used to make the paste that you are applying. All of these pastes are starting off with ingredients that are essentially crystals. That's not good enough. You need to pound them into a fine powder. Mortar and pestle and some really boring arm exercises to get a very thin, fine powder out of it. Any little flakes that are larger are going to show up in your finished product. Grinding things fine is boring, but it's over with. Having the flakes that will show up in your finished product and give you a kind of a pitted effect rather than a smooth effect, you're stuck with forever. Spend the extra time, go over it. I use a mortar and pestle because, as I said, trying to be as close to period as possible was what this project was about for me. You could just as easily use a spice grinder that you're never going to use for food ever again and grind things up. Unfortunately, things are going to be showing up in a small crystal, a fine salt type that my camera is not capturing very well at all. I will have to invest in a new camera. But right now, sorry, I'm seeing the comment. Yeah, I will do that later to put up the book name. Everything needs to be ground to approximately the same consistency, and it's the finest flour that you want. All of your main ingredients are dry, they're crystals. You need some fluid to hold it together to turn a powder into a paste. And on all of the recipes in the book, the fluid that they're calling for is vinegar. And this is where I started to drift away from my trying to do it as close to period as possible. On some of the recipes, it said to use vinegar, and on some of the recipes, it said to use a strong vinegar. What's the difference between a vinegar and a strong vinegar? The book ain't telling. Maybe this is a language and grammar issue, that it's just two different ways to say the same thing. Maybe they are trying to indicate there's a difference, but what is that difference? So I had to go down the rabbit hole of how do you do period vinegars? For modern understanding, we rate vinegars on their percent. Vinegar in its most basic form is acetic acid and water. And we rate it on how much acetic acid is in the thing. 5% vinegar means that it's 5% acid, 95% water. And that's what we would think of as normal kitchen vinegar. You can put it on your salad, you can make a soup out of it, you can whatever. In period, what would a strong vinegar be? And nowadays, with chemicals and laboratories, we can make it any arbitrary percentage that we want. Turns out that in period, you were really limited to a maximum of 20% strength vinegar. And getting to 20% is a royal pain in the tuchus and a lot of time and effort. Modern understanding is that once you cross about 10%, the vinegar is becoming less of a foodstuff and more of a blister agent. So as a starting assumption, I said that a vinegar is anything that you'd be willing to eat, and a strong vinegar is something you wouldn't be willing to eat. So above and below the 10% line. This is an area that you want to be very careful with. Use a face shield or at least laboratory goggles. Above 10%, it's a blister agent. Above 10%, it will permanently blind you if you get a splash in your eyeball. Don't do this. Use safety protection. So I started trying all of the different recipes, and I would use a 5% vinegar, a 10% vinegar, a 15% vinegar, a 20% vinegar. Was there a difference? It turns out there is a difference in how the acid eats into the steel between a 5% vinegar and a 10% vinegar. It's a small difference, but it is there and naked eye observable. 10 to 15, 15 to 20, you really do not see the difference. So there's no reason to go to what would have been the historical maximum of 20%. It gives you the same results as a 10%. Use the 10%, you get twice as much work for the same amount of dollars worth of material. All of the recipes, when they are talking about the bulk solids that are going into them, give it not so much in modern measurements, but as a relative amount. Take 3 parts of this and mix it with 1 part of that. Okay, but it is 3 parts by weight or by volume. Does it make a difference? So once again, I started experimenting. If it's 3 parts of this and 1 part of that, I'll do 3 ounces and 1 ounce. And then I'll try it with 3 cups versus 1 cup. And volume versus weight, is there a difference? The answer turns out to be no. All of these are close enough to the same density that whether you measure it by weight or by volume, you get the same results. Just be consistent. The one exception to that, some of the recipes are calling for charcoal, which kind of raised my eyebrows. The modern understanding, which I've been trying to avoid, was that charcoal is a neutralizer. You use charcoal filters to clean your drinking water. You use charcoal filters to filter the air. It neutralizes things. Why would charcoal be called for in a recipe that is designed to corrode things? The charcoal is a much lower density than all the other ingredients. So for charcoal, whether you are doing it by weight or by volume is a massive difference in how much of this stuff you're putting in. The results that I got, If you are doing all of your ingredients by weight, you are not putting in enough charcoal. If you are doing it by volume, that's a much larger amount of charcoal. It gives you much better results. On all of these acids that you are putting down on the metal, there's a limited amount of time that the acid will be active. As you are letting it sit there and it's doing its reaction thing, it will eventually choke out between the amount of chemicals in the acid being used up by eating the steel, and then the waste products of that reaction building up between the acid and the steel. There's a time limit that after you've exceeded it, you're really not getting any additional benefit for the time. The charcoal changes that time limit. If I have a recipe with no charcoal in it, after 1 to 2 hours, the acid really isn't doing anything else. I need to take that off. If my etching is not deep enough, I put a fresh layer of the acid on and let it sit for another 1 to 2 hours and repeat this until I get what I wanted. If I have included charcoal in the recipe, it is still active and still eating in for 3 to 4 hours. So I'm getting twice as much work by including the charcoal. It is neutralizing the waste products of the reaction. Again, not really an understanding that they would have had, but a practical effect that they could deal with and understand. For almost all of the recipes, it seems like the biggest component that they are calling for is vitriol, what we would call copper sulfate. There are a few that are using verdigris, which is copper acetate. For us, that's weed killer and paint, a scribal paint. Is there a difference? Because some of the recipes seem to be the same, except for substituting those two. The vitriol, the copper sulfate, gives you just a little bit deeper of an etch per unit of time. But the verdigris very faintly tints or colors the steel as it's doing its work. So from 10 or 20 feet away, a fractionally deeper versus a fractionally darker reaction, you don't really see the difference between them. It's a question of what materials do you have access to? What do you want out of it? And that kind of took me full circle that when I was looking at this book, why do I need 7 different recipes for an acid to do the same thing? What's better about this one or that one? Why would I want to use this one other than that one? And they all do seem to come out pretty identical. It's seems to be a question of what do you have available to you and what can you get? Sorry, going back to the charcoal. Every recipe where the book calls for charcoal, it specifies a lindenwood charcoal. No other type but lindenwood. You can't go to a charcoal briquette that we would get easily modernly for the barbecue, grind it up, It's got a whole bunch of chemicals in there to make it easy to light, which we really don't want, and to bind it into its shape. And we kind of want things to move as we put them. But is there a difference between oak, ash, lindenwood? I don't know. I've got a friend who says they can get me some lindenwood charcoal. I haven't been able to get that from them. So I've been using natural hardwood charcoal. It's just hardwood that has been charcoalized, no extra chemicals. It is a whole bunch of work to smash this into a usable fineness of powder, but it does seem to give very good results. So is there a difference? Still experimenting with that. I'll let you know later. How long does it sit? The recipes do not say. Now, like I said, through experimentation, I found that the 1 to 2 hours without charcoal, 3 to 4, seems to be about right. The best the recipes say is till it be dry. Well, how long it takes to dry is how much vinegar did you use? How wet was your paste? Not a whole lot of guidance there. Does anyone have any questions? I'll take that as a no. There was, for anyone who wants to go back, the TV show Nova did an episode a while back on them trying to recreate a period armor as accurately as they could. And one of the things they did was acid etch the decorations and then fire gild it. My wife won't let me work with mercury, so I guess I'm not going to be decorating anything with gold. Darn it. The recipe that they used was 1 part of salt, 2 parts of copper sulfate. That seems okay. It worked for them. It obviously works. The book that I was using gives 2 parts of verdigris and 1 part of salt. So it seems to be they're using almost the same recipe, substituting the verdigris for the copper sulfate. I don't know if they found a source that I haven't, or whether either they or I are dealing with a bad translation. I've reached out to them and have received no reply, but both of the recipes, either way you look at it, are giving the good result. So I'm not sure where, if anywhere, the fault is there. There is one recipe that uses not vinegar, but urine for its liquid. Have not tried that one yet. It specifies that you need to keep it in a cold cellar while it is doing its work, which might be just to keep the odor down. I don't know. But now that we are in winter, my basement is cold enough I can try this without having to store things in the refrigerator. Yeah, metal-eating chemicals in with the food is probably a bad idea. So again, if anyone has questions, please speak up. Other than that, I've kind of run out of stuff. This went a lot faster than I thought. I have found this morning when trying this, my camera is not working real well, but you can start to see the results of the etching that I do. as I was trying all of these different recipes, I was trying the same pattern over and over with the different recipes that gave me something to compare, which one did better or worse. This one has on the acid etched part a very smooth surface where I had spent the extra time to really grind things fine. Where, again, this one is a much more pitted, rougher surface. And again, I do apologize. I had thought the camera would capture this a lot better than it actually does. But yeah, the extra grind is boring, but your results are forever. Spend the time. Okay, I see there are. Okay, in the text, I see that there's a question, have I experimented with what the various recipes do on various steels? No, I've been, again, trying to do this with what they had and how they could have done it. And stainless was just not a thing they had access to, so I have not experimented with that, or titanium or aluminum. They were dealing with irons and steels. Again, since my major focus is on armor, that's the type of steel I've been dealing with. That the etching started about 1500 and just exploded in popularity. And 1500, they were working with steels that they wanted the ability to harden unless you were Italian, but that's a different thing. So they could not control the exact makeup of the steel as well as a modern steel can. They had higher slag incursions. They had a whole slew of trace elements that we can eliminate. But I've been trying to deal with an armor grade steel. It's what I had sitting in my shop, usable as scrap, and that's the justification that I used for it. Should the design change how the paste works? So does the complex nature of the design change how the paste works? Not really. The limit is how well you apply your resist. And you can do that either in the positive or the negative, by which I mean I can cover a whole area with the resist and then use something sharp like a chopstick that you've run through a pencil sharpener to scrape away the areas that you want to be eaten. Or you can do it in the negative where I only put the paint down on the areas I want the paste not to. And on one of them, you are limited by how good is your control of the chopstick for how fine that line can be. And the other one, you are limited by how good is my hand with a paintbrush. Let's be kind and say that my hand with a paintbrush could use a lot of improvement. Another question, I have seen other acid etching cause issues with fumes. Same true here? No. Because the reactions are going so slowly, I have not seen any problem with fumes. The closest to an airborne problem I've seen is that when I'm grinding things from their base state into the fine powder, that can kick dust into the air. a simple mask keeps you from sneezing black. Which is probably just a basic safety precaution, because once again, we're dealing with stuff that will eventually eat steel, and it's probably not a good plan to have this in your lungs. But as far as toxic fumes given off by the reaction between the acid and the metal, I have not seen any of that. Difference in tempers of the steel. Yes. If you have hardened the steel, this process goes much slower. The fully annealed steel is much faster. So to get a nice etch, I'm seeing that you probably need 3 or 4 repeats of applying the acid, letting it do its job, scraping it off, putting fresh acid in. Once you've hardened the steel, that goes about half as fast. So you're up in the 6 or 8 repeats, which is going to give you a problem that your resist is not going to last that many applications. So at some point, you've got to completely dry the piece and reapply your resist. If you're doing a fancy pattern, that's when you need to be really careful that you're putting down the same pattern in the same place so that you're not getting fuzzy lines out of it. Do the etched portions rust or degrade faster? I do not know. The pieces I've been working on, I haven't thought to expose them. I've just had them sitting in the shop, and I've seen no difference between how they're reacting and the base metal is reacting to the moisture in the shop. That's actually worth deliberately exposing them and seeing whether it rusts worse or not. Thank you, that's a good idea. Okay, I think I've gotten all of the questions that are cropping up in the text. So if anyone wants to unmute and chat, please do so. Otherwise, I'm kind of at a loss, and we've got not quite 20 minutes left before the next class starts. Okay. So I'm guessing creating multiple levels of etch is the matter of just reapplying the resist and etching for less time. Here we start running into the question of what the original pieces have been subjected to. Yes, it would definitely be possible to get a multi-layered etch, different sections at different depths, by reapplying and doing differently. I personally have not been able to find any examples of this that have come down to us in period. It might be that I just haven't seen the right pieces. It might be that anything that had that multiple layers going on has just had time wear it down. You know, Henry VIII's unused suit from cloth of gold was once rough from the hammer, and several centuries of museums polishing it makes it look pretty shiny. Has the same thing happened here? I don't know. Again, I do not know, but taking a guess at it, it's probably not worth the effort. The visual difference between multiple different depths on the same etch is probably not going to be able to be noticeable naked eye at 10 feet away. So if people can't see it, unless they're right on top of you, is it worth the effort of putting it there? Maybe if you want to show off your immense skill at your art, but for practical day-to-day, I'm probably not seeing it.
So here's a question. I've seen where etching too deep will kind of under etch it. In other words, you get a deeper etch the farther you go down, which in some cases, if you're pounding in and filling in with wire and things like that, that's good because that wire will stay in place. And that's what actually you want, is that undercut. But is this, you have the same problem with this etching style?
I've not seen that. And I think that's because this is the acid is actually a paste. And so it's staying very much where I've put it. It's not kind of creeping out to cut under. It's mostly cutting straight down.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, because, you know, most of the other ones, you're looking at an agitated solution that tends to, you know, especially where you're in the, you know, brass or something like that, it tends to erode underneath once you get past the resist, right?
Yeah.
So.
And here, you know, what I've been dealing with is steel, which is a comparatively hard metal compared to brass. And it's a paste rather than a fluid, so it does not flow very nicely at all. It stays where you put it.
What kind of tools are you using to remove the resist?
A paper towel.
No, I'm talking like to remove the resist to do the etching. So, I mean, you're probably using a number of different tools to essentially create your art, the art that you're going to be etching, right?
So it's whether you're dealing with the positive or the negative, you can put just a broad swath of resist and then use something to scrape parts of that away. And I've used a chopstick that I ran through a pencil sharpener. It gives me a very fine point that I can get very, very fine lines in the middle of all this resisted area.
Great idea. Yeah, I like it.
The other option is to do just the opposite, where I'm going to let the acid chew up all of the steel except for this fine line that I've put down with a paintbrush. It's kind of the inverse of the chopstick method. And if you want fine detail, the chopstick method is the way to go. Or at least for me, my hand is not steady enough with the paintbrush to get that very, very fine line. I can do a slightly fatter line, but if I want the fine detail, I've got to be scraping something with anything sharp. There's got to be a limit there for practical purposes on how small the point of your scrapey thing is, but I have not investigated that. Like I said, a chopstick through the pencil sharpener is what I've been using. And you know, to give an example of kind of the difference, when I went to the Tournament of Arts, they said that they wanted you to take a little piece of paper, fold it into a tent, and write your name on it so that everyone knew who you were. I thought that was boring, so I did a nameplate out of acid etching, and on one side of the nameplate, I covered everything except where I wanted it to etch. And then on the other side, I did the opposite. So I've gotten, let's see if I can, yeah, you can get the shiny with just the acid etched name, or you can get the acid etched everything except the shiny name to
Well
it.
done. Well done. So, boy, what was it? There was a question until you showed me your nice work there. Oh, you talked about you talked about after the etch is slowing down or stopped, removing the acid paste and then reapplying it again. Does that not remove the resist if it's not dried enough?
It calls for for some delicate work. If I'm just removing the acid, if I take a cloth and I just swipe it across, then I've removed the acid, but I've also smeared my resist and my pattern is gone. If you take, again, I'm using chopsticks, and you kind of, if I've got an area like this that I need to pull the acid off of, I'll take the chopstick and just press it like a dull knife a couple of times across, and that will break up the acid paste, and I can just flick it off without damaging the resist underneath it.
Okay, so sounds like the acid paste that will actually harden relatively quick and then dry, and then you can essentially chip it off.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, you're doing kind of a balancing act with your resist underneath that. You want the resist to be dry enough that it stays in place as the acid is put on and removed. But you don't want it so dry that when you're done with the piece, it's hard to get, the resist is hard to get off of your piece. You want something that you can, with a little elbow grease, wipe off and have a lump of junk on a rag, rather than having to get a scraper or some sandpaper and create lead-based dust that's going all over your shop.
Right. So, obviously, there's simpler resists out there that are modern.
Mm-hmm.
So this may be for some people here, this is the education of how to create a period resist, and maybe try it. But in the long run, if they're looking for the etching output, then they'd probably want to look at it more modern based resist.
Yes.
Which is perfectly fine in the SCA as long as you understand the whole process and write that and make sure that the people reviewing also understand that process.
Yeah, for me, the process was the point. How did they do it? If the process is not the point, if having the acid etched thingy, the end result is your goal, is that, if that's the important part to you, I cannot recommend doing the period methods like I am doing.
No, but I think you offer an important piece. There's probably some people doing wonderful work out there like that.
Yes.
And this is that next layer of understanding how to be a good artist.
There is a gentleman, and I'm sorry, I am forgetting his name, who just recently did acid etching on an armor. And he used a computer to lay out the specific design that he wanted, tweaked for the amount of curvature on the piece he was going to be doing. He used a computer-controlled vinyl cutter to make self-adhesive vinyl that he used as the resist. And then he laid that on the steel, put the paste on it, and then was able to just peel everything off. And he gets fantastic, beautiful work. And again, if the thingy is the goal, yes, by all means, use those cheats. It gives you much, much nicer result for a lower skill input. And the results are, you can't tell when you're looking at the thing how it was done.
Right.
You could use electrician's tape cut with a razor and then use a modern saltwater acid and get the same results. Just don't breathe the fumes. That's bad.
Yes, that's where I've seen it.
Yeah.
And if the thing you want is the thing, I cannot say strongly enough that the modern methods are way better, easier, more controllable. Do that.
Faster, much faster.
Well, and
Yes.
safer, right? And we have a safety piece
Yeah.
here. So if you're
Yes.
doing a lot, do it the safe way, because over time, a lot can become dangerous in the medieval way.
Yeah.
But understand. I mean, the key here is to understand the way they did it.
Mhm. And, we have not just the safety of myself dealing with these chemicals. It's what do I do with them when I'm done? I live in a place where I can take it to City Hall and say, toxic waste, you deal with it, and it will be disposed of correctly. But you don't want to be putting lead in your trash where it's going to go into the city landfill. You don't want to be doing copper acetate into the city landfill. Again, the modern methods don't have quite that issue with toxicity.
Right.
And
well, thank you very much for the class. That was excellent. And, I've only dabbled in it, and I've always wondered about how they did it in periods. So this is absolutely wonderful. And I see everybody prepping for the next class, which looks very good as well. Thank you, Your Highness. So, so wonderful job.
Thank you.
I look forward to meeting you and seeing some of the pieces you've done. I've used all the modern methods. His Grace Branos has seen a piece I did for the sitting crown of Caid. But I haven't really explored the period methods yet, but you've piqued my interest. I appreciate that.
Well, it'd be good to see you, Carl. I want to see some stuff.
And someone had asked for the book. I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to post that. Whoever that was, if you could email me, calum@wowway.com, I'll be glad to send you that information. And other than that, I think we're just about out of time. Thank you everyone for attending. You've been a great set of guinea pigs for me to teach my first Zoom class.
Well done.